The rose is a flower that has become one of the most famous and prominent symbols throughout all of human history, with it appearing in many different cultures, and over those years it has gained a plethora of meanings, from its connection to passionate love, grace, and admiration, to even pain and suffering, and it's all thanks to its honestly mesmerizing appearance, showing off both sides of nature, with its beautiful petals and alluring aroma all protected by a thorny stem. And a character who manages to represent everything about the rose is the nicely dressed, nail-driving, nuanced diva, Nobara Kugisaki, the Straw Doll Shaman. This video contains spoilers for Jujutsu Kaisen up to the most recent arc in the manga. Thus, if you want to avoid spoilers, you have been warned. Nobara Kugisaki is one of the tritagonists of Jujutsu Kaisen, and a first year at the Tokyo branch of the Sorcerer's Academy. And while she doesn't possess a famous power like the other tritagonists Yuji and Megumi, Nobara is still incredibly skilled as a sorcerer, and was even exercising curses long before she moved to Tokyo. And when she arrived, she quickly earned a shot at the title of Grade 1 during her first year. She is someone who is determined to live life to its fullest and doesn't let anyone stop her, and this personality has made her stand out to a lot of people. But before we get too into that, let's first discuss the meaning behind her name and design. Starting first with her design, Akutami-sensei has discussed in the past that she may have been heavily inspired by a series he read growing up called Go Haromi Go, which is a josei romantic comedy, with Nobara taking after the titular character Haromi Hashiba, as they both talk about their determination to live in Tokyo and achieving this goal by going to a special academy there. He also mentioned that he may have based Nobara's design partially off of Haromi, though he is a bit shy to say so, likely because he also admits that he couldn't draw Nobara, let alone any female character in his series, cute, so he works to make them stand out in other ways, and this is partially because Akutami believes in giving his characters appropriate body types to fit their personalities and fighting styles. Thus, Nobara was given a bit more of a muscular or bulky build to her, compared to other females in Jump, specifically having lightly defined leg and arm muscles, and having a crude and ungraceful weapon like a hammer and nails, though he does divulge some time to allow her to dress up and act girly when she can, and this is done so he can reinforce Nobara's views on beauty and strength. This is also why Nobara carved a heart into her hammer, in an attempt to make it look cute. And beyond her character design, Nobara Kugisaki is one of Jujutsu Kaisen's most densely packed names, reflecting not only her inner curse technique, but how she carries herself as well. Starting first with her given name, Nobara, which when broken down essentially means wild rose, which not only relates to Nobara's own country girl status, but also in how roses are heavily related to the rest of her character. Starting first with the different color of roses all having meanings that match up with Nobara's own hair color. Firstly, given a fact about her that we know is that she actively dyes her hair orange, it would only make sense that her determination matches well with the orange rose's own meaning, as this color of rose carries the meaning of enthusiasm and passion for oneself or someone else, which is two terms that describe Nobara amazingly, as not only is she passionate about living in the city, so much so that she would put her life on the line to become a sorcerer just to do that, but also she carries an enthusiasm with her in her life even while working as a sorcerer, spending most of her free time shopping for new clothes, just to experiment with her looks, trying out new food to expand her tastes, and even sightseeing for the purpose of expanding her horizons. Though her journey out into the city relates heavily to her natural hair color, that being black, and how that relates to the meaning assigned to the black rose. A black rose signifies a major change in one's life, and this change came in the form of Nobara's guiding light, Sayori, who is a girl that moved to the countryside from the city and taught Nobara that she could be both tough and beautiful at the same time, a lifestyle that she is determined to live to its fullest. Though there is more to the rose connection, I'll get more into depth of that later on in the video, but I will say that the thorns of a rose play very well with her family name, Kugisaki, which when broken up is comprised of the characters for nail or peg and peninsula, which is a landmass surrounded by water or projecting out of a body of water, which Akutami-sensei claims was partially chosen because it was a rare name in Japan, but it's also very clear given the thorn connection and the use of the literal character for nail that it also relates to her own innate curse technique, this being the straw doll technique. The straw doll technique is a combat-focused curse technique that is heavily based on the traditional Japanese cursing method known as Uchi no Takimari, in which a practitioner practitioner, usually a scorned woman in mythology, enters the woods of a shrine late at night, from around 1 a.m. to 3 a.m., and proceeds to hammer a nail through a straw doll into a sacred tree. The doll itself is a representation of their object of scorn, and in turn, would impose a curse onto the target of the practitioner's desire. This method is very famous among Japanese culture, and has become a common trope throughout Japanese media representing curses, from people using it like Nobara, to even being a visual used in Pokemon or Persona 5 for their own curse skills. Though Nobara's specific practitioner of this ability is slightly different from tradition, as while it uses most of the same tools, such as a straw doll, hammer, and nails, and she was taught it by what appears to be a very traditionalist-minded grandmother, she seems to have modernized the method quite a bit. As she can not only utilize it at any time, she also doesn't need a ceremony or a sacred tree to inflict the curse on something else. And sometimes, she doesn't even need a straw doll, being able to just fire out curse energy-infused nails by striking them with her hammer, which makes for very effective projectiles. And this is because Nobara has some pretty well-trained curse energy control, being able to not only enhance her nails upon striking them, but also being able to achieve a black flash later on in the series. Though, due to the weak nature of curses on the countryside, Nobara rarely had to utilize her stronger techniques, but her work in Tokyo shows that she didn't fall out of practice with them either. And each of these techniques have a reference and a meaning to their name, so let's start with her main technique, Resonance. Resonance is a curse technique that can be used both offensively and counteractively, and works in a similar way to the main practitioner of Ushi no Takimari, whereas Nobara drives a nail through the straw doll into a piece of the cursed spirit that she is targeting with this ability. And much like the main cursing method, Ushi no Takimari, the segment which Nobara strikes on the straw doll with the nail will resonate into the cursed spirit's main body. An example of this being, if she were to drive a spike through the chest of the straw doll into a severed piece of a cursed spirit, the spirit's chest would burst open from the inside. Though, as I mentioned, because of Nobara's own modernization of this technique, the straw doll isn't fully necessary even for things such as resonance. As a spirit who has inflicted their own ability onto Nobara, she can use her newly cursed body as a surrogate straw doll to connect directly to the person who inflicted the curse, allowing her to drive nails through herself and inflict pain onto the cursor. And this pain will last until either curse techniques are lifted. Along with this, her resonance can also be used on other surrogate straw dolls that connect directly to a curse user, making her actually a perfect counter to Mahito's own technique to create separate bodies from his soul, as no matter which version that she strikes with her resonance, it will hit both of them. She can also use this technique to disable curse tools for a time being, as shown when she disables Momo's own broomstick by snagging a piece of it, then striking it with resonance and canceling out its own curse frequency. The name resonance has two specific meanings. First is pretty literal, as it plays on the concept in physics, where the technique sends out a frequency of curse energy that matches up with the normal energy frequency of her targets and then inflicts the damage, similar to how you can shatter a wine glass by playing the right sound frequency. Though the other approach that Nobara utilizes matches up very well with a separate definition of resonance, which speaks about being able to invoke an emotion or feeling onto someone, which is why she can use this form to transfer pain to her targets instead of directly damaging them. Though beyond this reference, Akutami-sensei also reveals in the official fan book for Jujutsu Kaisen that Nobara's straw doll technique is in some way a reference to One Piece's own Basil Hawkins' Straw Fruit, and resonance itself seems to be the direct reference that he's speaking of, as there's an ability used by Basil Hawkins called Life Minus, where if damage is inflicted onto Basil in some way, he can redirect it to someone tied to a straw doll that he created with his devil fruit that he keeps in him at all times. Though Nobara can't always count on having her straw doll ready, hence why she uses another technique to increase the destructive power of her nails. This ability is called Hairpin, or more specifically, Kanazashi. How Hairpin works is Nobara pours her curse energy into her nails when she launches them outwards, and with the snap of her fingers, can trigger an explosion of curse energy that not only causes a large curse spike to appear from the nail, or just a regular explosion kinda like a Mega Man 2 style crash bomb, but can also cause the area that was struck by the nail to be destroyed, again, like a crash bomb. Which means if Hairpin connects with a target, it can cause significant damage to the body, almost destroying it actually. Now, Hairpin gets its name specifically from a traditional Japanese hair accessory called a kanzashi, which originates from the Jomon period and was a single rod or stick worn in the hair that would ward off evil spirits. Though over time, this simple simple rod would become more and more decorated, reaching its peak in the Edo era, and the accessory is actually still used to this day in certain hairstyles. And this ties together perfectly fashion and form, which exactly matches Nobara's character, as she is someone who combines beauty and strength together, or more accurately, is someone who is determined to be herself. As Nobara grew up on the countryside, and from a very young age, she stood out from the crowd due to her own tomboy antics. Not only roughhousing with the boys in her area, but also dressing in a very neutral fashion and spoke in a very crude, unfeminine way. She was likely this way because she doesn't seem to have a parental figure to influence her, only her grandmother that doubled as both her cursed teacher and, supposedly, her only guardian, as Nobara's parents seem to be absent from her life, given how often she spends away from home, and her friend only noticed that she started acting more soft and feminine after she met someone who acted as sort of a mother figure to her. And on top of all that, she started her year late at Tokyo because her grandmother resisted the transition to Tokyo, which is something that I don't think would have mattered all that much and wouldn't have been mentioned if her actual parents were still in the picture. Along with this, due to her having cursed potential, Nobara was unable to relate with the normal people of her village, so she tried to separate herself from the village as a whole, until two people moved in from the city, the first being Fumi, someone who she became fast friends with after trying to trade backpacks with her during preschool, which visually speaking, it seems like Fumi is a direct reference to the series Kome Can't Communicate, and she was likely designed this way to play a comedic foil to Nobara's own loud and assertive personality, as she was created to give us a glimpse into what Nobara was like growing up. The other girl who moved to the country was Sayori, someone that Nobara saw as a bit of a mother figure, who not only let Nobara get in touch with her more feminine side, but also helped her refine herself to a degree. Nobara described her best when she said she was as beautiful as a doll. The dolls she likely wished she could grow up with instead of the creepy straw ones that she knew. But soon, she started to realize the more Sayori stood out and introduced ideas to the country village, the more she was ostracized by the villagers. They viewed her as stuck up or egotistical, and eventually drove Sayori out of the countryside. And this event disgusted Nobara. To see someone like Sayori punished for simply choosing to live their life in a different way, which in turn made Nobara come to a realization. If she was forced to stay in this village, she would die, both metaphorically or physically, as eventually the people would turn on her for her strong sense of self, forcing her to either choose to suppress her own inner desires to match the herd, effectively killing Nobara's sense of self, or be ostracized and abandoned like her idol. Instead, she decided to take life by the horns and make her own path. She enrolled in the Jujutsu Technical Academy in Tokyo, the home city of Sayori, against her grandmother's wishes and left her home behind, saying she would never return, telling her friend Fumi to follow her in her pursuit out of the country as soon as she had a chance. And from here, Nobara wouldn't let anyone stand in her way to success. As she puts it herself, if you aren't her ride or die, then don't try to veer her off course, cause she has zero empathy for those who get in her way. But even she accepts that people will inevitably come crashing into her life. But it's the ones with strong wills that don't make excuses for their hardship that she ends up liking. People like Maki and Yuji who turn awful situations on their head, versus someone like Mai Zenin who devalues others then complains about being left behind. Because to Nobara, life isn't about what's fair or who's blessed. She saw firsthand, no matter how perfect you are, people will always find a reason to hate you. So, life is more about how an individual makes do with what they have. Life is about being beautiful and strong. Nobara is about as empathetic as the rose she gets her name from. She's someone who, if you try to force down a path she doesn't like, you get stabbed by the thorns that she's built from, which is shown best in her endless trash talking during her fights. She doesn't care what her opponents have to say. To her, death is the only alternative to not being herself, which is why she's so tough and being able to fight at her fullest potential, even if it means inflicting damage onto herself to win. Though it should be stated, she isn't without empathy. She was willing to trade her life for the life of a child when a cursed spirit took a hostage. Along with this, she learned to channel her energy into a squeaky hammer so that she wouldn't have to kill human opponents that she fought. And her main goal was to just reunite with Fumi and Sayori in Tokyo so the three of them would be able to hang out like they used to when they were younger. Though, due to her fieldwork, Nobara may never get to see that outcome be fulfilled, which leads me to the final relation to roses. And as I mentioned earlier, the rose is a prominent symbol all throughout the world, appearing on dozens of different designs, 4 specific designs being tarot cards, which all of them match Nobara in some sense, these being the Fool, the Magician, the Strength, and finally, Death. Starting first with the Fool, which is a card that represents new beginnings and having faith in one's future. Nobara joined the Tokyo branch of the Jujutsu Academy to start life anew with unshakable confidence in her own abilities and herself, which matches very well with the role of the Fool. Then comes the Magician, which not only relates to her in a literal sense, given that she is a literal sorcerer, but it also represents one finding their talent and being told to tap fully into their potential rather than holding back, which given that Nobara actually had to start using her techniques beyond her cursed nails to solve her problems in the city, and then ended up achieving a Black Flash, which is peak curse control, means that she fulfilled this role quite well. Then you have the Strength, which is a card that is all about believing in yourself and having confidence in your abilities. Ultimately, it is the arcana that best matches her, though it would soon be followed up by Death, which tends to not actually represent physical death, but the end of something, like a relationship or an increase of self-awareness, which, given Nobara started her career in Tokyo by abandoning everything she once knew, she represents death quite well. Though, speaking of death, post the Shibuya incident, she seems to be teetering on the edge of it, as in a battle with Mahito, in a moment of weakness, she left herself open to his own curse technique, which caused the left side of her face to burst outward, destroying her eye and seemingly killing her then and there. Though, in her final moments, she turned to Yuji with a smile on her face and assured him that she didn't regret her choices, proving what I mentioned prior, as to Nobara, death is a preferable alternative to not being herself. Though the reason I mentioned that she is teetering on the edge of death is because moments after this occurred, her dying body was placed into essentially suspended animation by a curse ability of one of her ally sorcerers, though her condition isn't the most hopeful, as the man who helped her even said not to get your hopes up, but her chances of survival aren't zero, just extremely unlikely. Though, if we were to look at her own tarot reading, there might be some hope in her future, because as I mentioned, the Death card, while being scary, rarely actually represents actual physical death, especially when paired with cards like the Strength Arcana, which is one you want to see pulled when the person in question is recovering from an illness or injury, because it discusses how they will pull through. Not to mention that both the Magician and the Fool speak about being rewarded by luck in some sense. I feel all of her cards are a good sign for her future, especially since she's inspired by a character who, outside of being known for his straw dolls, is known for his own tarot card readings. Though, at the end of the day, no matter how hopeful I am about Nobara's own fate, it is actually still pretty up in the air, as Akutami is not opposed to fully killing off characters when they've filled their role, saying even that he did what he did to Nobara to break Yuji and, in turn, the readers' hearts. And the reason that this was so effective is because Nobara has become somewhat of an icon in and of herself, not only being a lot of people's favorite characters, but she also caught the attention of other industry professionals, such as Chainsaw Man's Tatsuki Fujimoto, or Yum, the creator of Senpai is Mine and the main inspiration behind the anime Miryou Tights, who both showed their love for the series, and Nobara specifically, by drawing her in their own style. Nobara Kugisaki has become an icon of the series, someone other creators see as a change for the Norman jump, and eventually she could hammer out a road for the future of the industry. Because Nobara Kugisaki is a character that Akutami-sensei has clearly put a lot of effort into, from the endless amount of symbolic connections to roses, or to how he even focuses on damage to a specific region of the right side of her face that leads to her inevitable fatal injury. We know so much about Nobara that we even know who she mains in Super Smash Bros., that being Captain Falcon, and how she's always going for meteor smashes is another subtle tie to the fact that she uses a hammer and nails because meteor smashes are spikes. Everything is so subtly perfect about Nobara's character that it makes going back and finding even more details about her infinitely rewarding. She has become a beautiful rose whose thorns would cut deep in those who try and hold on tight, but when you let go and watch her grow, you'll be amazed at what she could accomplish. And if you enjoyed this video and want to help support me and my channel for the future to come, pledge to my Patreon at patreon.com/metingoutthebadguy. It really helps no matter how small you pledge. And if you want to not let anything stand in your way when you try to make your way through life, the best solution is to buy a copy of Shimoneta, A Boring World Where the Concept of Dirty Jokes Doesn't Exist at buyshimoneta.com.